Remember college? Ramen noodles for breakfast, keg stands at the frat house, and that one time you wore a toga to class? Sleep came easy and hangovers were the worst of our worries. We'll be digging through our college days when our knees didn't hurt and we could bend down to tie our own shoes without any help. Then we'll crash land back in reality, where you know your social calendar features more doctor's appointments than happy hours. This will be a hilarious, unflinching look at the journey from dorm room debauchery to derm filler diplomacy. We'll be chatting with friends whose stories are as legendary as they are relatable. We'll laugh, we'll cry, maybe even apply some face cream together. Getting older might come with many inconveniences, but it also comes with the wisdom, wit, and freedom to tell it like it is. This is Hot Flashbacks.
I would still pick that because it helped kind of set the precedence of my goals now today. She's all, give me the 60-year-old biddies and the cruise ships. And no, I loved it.
Welcome to Hot Flashbacks. I'm your host, Molly Ward. Thanks for rejoining us for part 2 of our episode on women and middle-age anxiety. I believe that last we left off, we were chatting with my friend JeNae about therapy and her experiences using alcohol to cope with some of the anxiety she was going through, more specifically flaming Dr. Peppers. So JeNae, I'll let you get back to it.
So after a couple more years of flaming Dr. Peppers, I decided to go back to therapy and I tried EMDR. And EMDR was scary, but very, very helpful in taking a lot of these experiences off the shelf one at a time. That worked for me. It's not for everybody, but it worked for me.
It does depend also on some of the things that you're trying to work through, right? So what does EMDR stand for?
Google it.
I don't know either.
I don't know. It's like when I told you I had POTS and I was like, I can't pronounce it, but it's scary. It makes me pass out.
So I do know that with EMDR, a lot of times you're getting to a place where you can relive some of these experiences that you've had that have been traumatic so that you can process through them correctly. So trauma is one of those things where we talk about, anything can be trauma, really anything. And what's my trauma, it may look very different from what's your trauma. And you could go through the same thing I went through and have it not be traumatic.
Exactly.
Right? Trauma is just when you have an experience that you are not in the emotional state or do not have the emotional capacity to handle that experience properly. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it sticks with you and becomes traumatic. And so that can be as simple as, you're doing homework with your mom and she screamed at you about the math and you got really upset. And maybe she made you feel stupid in that moment for a second without intending to. And you were not in the place to handle that. Maybe a different day that would have been okay, but that day it wasn't. And now it sticks with you forever. Mm-hmm. It affects the way you feel when someone tries to help you. It affects the way you feel about math. It,
affects your willingness to want to do homework ever again.
Absolutely. It maybe even affects the way you feel about your mom.
Okay. That's a different podcast.
Another podcast. And so I think, EMDR can be really helpful for folks with PTSD in particular, because you can go essentially work with your therapist to go back to figure out what exactly the traumatic moment was. Because a lot of times with PTSD or anxiety, we're not fully aware of what causes the anxiousness or what causes the anxiety. So working backwards to get to that point and then going through that point over and over so that you can process it correctly so that it no longer becomes a trigger for you. And for my anxiety, part of the work was figuring out what is making me anxious, because when the kids are here, I'm anxious. I know that. I know I'm more turned up, but I don't know why. And it really came back to figuring out that it was that perfectionist in me. It was the wanting everyone to be happy. And when they weren't happy or I couldn't give them what they wanted, I was hurting and it was making me really sad. I was feeling sad and I was feeling upset. And I think working back through some of that anxiety, and when I think about my ADHD and when I think about how far I've come, I don't think I had anxiety when I was younger, at least not in the way that I'm experiencing it in my adulthood. And I think my mid-30s was when I really started to experience that I had anxiety, and that a lot of that comes across as control issues. And a lot of times when we're trying to be in control of things, it's because we're anxious about how things may turn out or work out. And so these controlling situations, and it wasn't necessarily I was controlling with the partner in that way. It was more that I was trying to control every scenario to happen just the way I thought it needed to so that I could function. I needed to control who was going to be there, what we were going to do. And if we said we were going to play a game and didn't play a game that night, that kind of thing would give me a lot of anxiety. In my mind, that's what we were going to do. And in my 30s, I started to realize that these things were becoming more debilitating, and I was getting more anxious, especially at work, related to work activities and coworkers and things not going exactly. I went to therapy. It's very helpful, and I've learned a lot of new coping mechanisms and also learned how to identify some of my mental health issues when they're happening. And like you talked about before, validation is really important to understanding, right? I think the biggest thing about validation is learning to accept yourself. When you can validate, or when someone can validate for you that the thing you're doing has a purpose and a reason, I feel like I can be more accepting of the mistakes that I make. And I've learned to love and care for myself more in the past 7 years than I think I have in my whole life. And as you get older, I think it's necessary to really dive into who you are and how much you like yourself. And it's no cliche, but in your middle ages, you can feel kind of alone at times. You don't have the circle you had in your 20s. You're not connected with the same number of people. You're not doing the same things that bring you maybe that successful type of experience that you have in your 20s, where you get your first job, or you have your first raise, or you get a promotion, and all those things can make you feel successful. And in your middle ages, I feel like they could be harder to come by, and your social circle shrinks. And so learning to accept myself and love myself and care about myself for who I am, while also acknowledging that some of my behavior needs work and I'm not excusing it, has been a process.
I agree. And I mean, I always talk about the difference between explaining my reaction and excusing my behavior. You know what I mean? And once I set that expectation for myself of, am I telling people more about me as an excuse for my shitty behavior, or am I telling them this as an explanation behind why my brain works? Because speaking up and sharing that with people, they don't know what they don't know, right? And so we talk about these people's responses or reactions to the way that they experience life, and we have a certain expectation in our head that would, give us an idea of if we're doing well or not, like, okay, I had the best party because I can see it on their faces. You get conditioned. Well, for me, at a very young age, as a form of survival, I had to become very in tune with people's emotions. Every room I walk into, I feel like I'm surveilling everybody to understand, are they in a good mood?
And that can, especially for folks who have parents who have anxiety, or parents who have bipolar or narcissistic personality disorder, because you never know what you're going to get. And as a child, when you grow up never knowing what you're going to get, you learn to be very responsive to people's emotions and actions so that you can come into the room the right way in the right moment.
Oh, and so prepared. Like, I think about, I got really good in high school. I could tell the mood that my biological mother was in based simply on how she shut the front door. And so that is something that I'm still working on in my adulthood, is I can't expect everybody to close a door quietly for the rest of my life, but door slamming is one of my triggers.
Well, that is such a skill, but again, moderation, because when you talk about, this is a skill, being able to walk into a work meeting and recognize the mood so you don't make a dumb joke at the wrong time is really important. And being able to sense and feel or unhappy is really important. But the extreme side of that is that you're changing yourself or who you are, how you feel in order to accommodate, and then often being overwhelmed by other people's emotions or feelings and keeping those in check. I know I often ask my wife, so are we okay? Because I can feel her vibes, and I'm really in tune with that. And any change in her behavior will trigger me to feel like I did something wrong. That harkens back to my abandonment issues, right? Of feeling like I'm going to be abandoned or left alone by someone that I love and care about. And so that triggers me to check in with her. She's like, I'm seriously fine. I'm just sitting here, just minding my own biz. I'm like, okay, I'm just making sure, I'm so insecure. But putting that on her, and for you, putting that on other people in your life is really overwhelming. And so we have this idea of moderation. Can I know when it's appropriate to moderate and temper my personality or what I want to say or how I feel based on the environment? And at other times to be able to say, okay, this person is feeling this way and it's not my responsibility. There you go.
There you go. I was going to say, I'm like, people can, we're, talking about that toxic positivity. It's like, you're allowed to be sad, mad, upset, whatever, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's anything that I've done. I to untangle that, and not everything that everybody does is a reflection of something that I said or did. And yeah, it's
wild.
You heard
it
it here first.
I looked up EMDR. So because we talked about it, I feel like we should at least say what it means. So it means eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a psychotherapy treatment that's designed to alleviate the distress associated with traumatic memories. And what we forgot to talk about, and we're not therapists, so don't take this information and run with it and give yourself EMDR or whatever, but is that the first part of it, eye movement, is what they do with you while you're discussing some of these traumatic events or going back in time to figure out where something stems from, is they sort of move your finger, their finger. They're moving your finger now. They put their finger in front of your eyes in sort of this hypnotic way, but it really is supposed to reprogram the way your eyes are responding, and that somehow desensitizes you to the experience that you had as you talk about it. This is deep stuff. I don't understand it. I'm not a therapist, but I know it's worked for folks, and I know it's worked particularly to get rid of things like fear around driving. So if you have post-traumatic stress and you got in a car accident and now you're scared to drive and that's become debilitating, these kinds of psychotherapy techniques can be really helpful. So sorry to circle back to EMDR, but I didn't want to leave our viewers hanging or having to Google it while they drive.
Well, yeah, thank you. Don't do that. Obey all traffic laws. But yeah, so for me, my hangups, I couldn't buy into the finger wag therapy for a while. So I shopped around for EMDR therapists, and the one that established my buy-in had this great, it was a light. You just followed the red dot back and forth across this bar. And then I had these two paddles in my hand that vibrated in sync with the red light. And for some reason, that felt like more of a science than finger. Like, because bless that poor woman, I was just not into it. I was like, yeah, too many Himalayan salt lamps. I hate it here. No, but I think it's all about shopping around and finding the therapist that matches your personality, that can challenge you to grow. Just thinking about the finger wag lady, and if she listens to this, how mortified I'm gonna be. But shopping around and finding someone that's gentle with you while still pushing you to do better, because I've had to, finding my therapist was a 3-year long process of finding someone that would call me on my shit. And I have like a whole little worksheet that I would go to and be like, can you do this? Can you call me out? Can you, don't be too soft with me? Because my whole life has been people being soft, and I didn't get to where I wanted to be as fast as I did. And so it wasn't until, finding the right therapist for you is very important. And I think that a lot of people can get discouraged. Just making an appointment to go to therapy, if you have that executive dysfunction, is already difficult. And then you finally get there, you go to your appointment, and it's not a fit.
Put a lot of time and effort into your first appointment too. I think people get overwhelmed. You really got to sit down and put everything out there, and then you leave and go, nope, that wasn't the one. I never have sought therapy for my ADHD, and it really was, I felt like it was very manageable. Again, until I got to my middle ages, when I had so many things to balance. In my 20s, my ADHD felt like a superpower. Mm-hmm. And I could be here, I could be there, I could get all the things done, I could do things fast, I moved quickly. And that was all good. I don't move quickly anymore because I'm old. But still, now when I move quickly, my bones creak.
You pay for it for 3 days. You get the second day sores. Oh my God.
I really felt like it was my superpower, and I didn't really recognize even that I had ADHD until my 30s, when I started to look back at experiences I had had, and my ADHD is still manageable. I haven't really sought psychiatric help for it. I am not on medication for it. I know it exists. And to this point, I feel like I'm in fairly good control of it. When things got out of hand for me, and when I started feeling like I needed more help, was the anxiety kicking in, because the combination of the two just became too much for me. And actually, the funny thing is, it wasn't actually too much for me. I thought I was rocking this world. It's like, it was everybody in my life that was like, what's going on? Yes. We need you to temper on some of these things. And so treating the anxiety has really helped me And medication has helped a lot, and I'm very grateful for it. I'm much more functional in a lot of ways and a lot more productive in a lot of ways. I still have ADHD and I still have things that I struggle with, but I feel like I've managed it well for most of my life. And so I'm okay to just keep doing that right now. And that may change. I know folks who get on medication for things like ADHD in their 50s or 60s. And so depending on your lifestyle, you may have managed it well, but then maybe you're 50 and you have this new job and you have to do accounting and you're like, wow, like this is really difficult for someone who has ADHD. I never experienced this before. So my work right now plays to my strengths. I work with a lot of people. I get to go to lots of meetings. I'm in and out. I'm all around the building. I'm doing everything from checking on some custodial or maintenance work to sitting in a meeting talking about free speech and First Amendment rights. And I feel like this buzz, this constant energy that my ADHD craves and desires, I feel I'm getting that dopamine. But if my career changes and I end up, doing something that requires me to sit in an office and only have a team of 1 or 2 people, I don't know that I would be as functional as I am now.
Oh, yeah. Well, I experienced that. I mean, last year was the most challenging year I've ever had, personally, professionally. I mean, in the span of 3 months, I was laid off from work. I realized I was in a very toxic marriage and needed to leave, and I lost everything. I lost everything in the matter of 3 months, and it wasn't until after I had kind of landed, the dust settled, and I was in my, the first rental I had been in years, that I started to notice I had lost so much of those tools and resources that do help you function with that neurodivergence. I had been so isolated, and I didn't realize how much you need your community to kind of let you know that call you out and say you need to temper this behavior, or have you noticed this about yourself? Because it's hard to see the forest through the trees most of the time, especially when it's your normal. And honestly, it wasn't until my entire life exploded that I realized how much rebuilding I had to do. I feel very thankful now that I can do it and create or curate a life for me that is a little bit more beneficial and helpful for my spicy brain. I think that the big takeaway is to not let it get to that point to where you don't even realize that you're in an environment that's not healthy for you or conducive to your personality, and you're dampening yourself or just muscling through, and you don't realize that you have anxiety, that a lot of the behaviors you're doing are a direct result of untreated or undiagnosed mental health opportunities. And I also don't call them mental health issues. That's intentional. I call them opportunities because, not being a toxic positive person, but they can be issues if you let them be, for sure. But I like to see it as each new symptom that I get or hurdle that I come up to, it's an opportunity to try and ascend to hopefully a better version and more tolerable person.
What are some of the things that you experienced? What are some of the, I don't want to say symptoms that you experienced that made you realize that maybe these things are related to anxiety?
Ooh, I'm glad you asked this, because it's something that I've said out loud in therapy and to one close friend. And
now you're just going to tell everybody.
Yeah, so buckle up. I didn't notice. I have, because of my history, I've gone pro at disassociation, and it's not healthy. It's just because you're not dealing with stuff doesn't mean that your body will start manifesting physical symptoms in its own way. And so the first thing that, as I realized I needed to leave my marriage, I got really good at hair pulling. And one day I was combing my hair and I saw a quarter-sized bald spot in the middle of my head that I hadn't even realized I had created in the course of a couple of...
hair pulling is very, very common.
Yeah.
It is an anxious response. And obviously when you do it too much, it is a problem. It's very common. Picking at your head or your scalp.
I'm so good.
Skin picking and hair pulling are, you're so good at that. You go pro.
I'm going pro. No, so I think that was the first, oh my gosh, now I cannot ignore it. I have this big bald spot. All of the Gen Zers are telling me I need to do a middle part, otherwise I'll look old. So I tried to do the middle part, and that's when I noticed I was bald. And so that was my first in many oh shits that I had, was my hair, which my hair, I hate to be that person, but my hair is my identity. And so that is the first thing that shook me up. And then I still wasn't ready. I still wasn't ready to admit that my situation was unhealthy. And then I started experiencing my anxiety resulted in having pseudo seizures, which is a direct result of not listening to those body cues of your heart race, you know, those sweaty palms, nausea, those lighter symptoms of anxiety.
I just thought I was getting old.
No, that's anxious. Yeah. And you excuse it, you dismiss it. And, you know, going back to my childhood of you're not anxious, everybody else has bad stuff. You're just, you know, a baby. But my body, as a form of protection, if I was in a stressful situation and I wasn't doing the healthy things of either removing me from that situation or trying to calm my sympathetic nerve system, it will do it for you. I have it on good authority that you will just have a seizure at FitCon in front of the LARPing section, which, why do they have LARPing? Because it was cool as hell to see people doing sword fights, I thought. But the lights, the noise, the being in crowds, which never was a problem for me. And so maybe that's why I didn't notice that I was having an unfun time, because I love people, most of them. You know, I like to say I'm a social introvert, but yeah, that was the first time that happened. And after some diagnostic tests, there was nothing neurological, and they said, "Do you have untreated anxiety?" And I was still not ready to admit it then. I was like, no, I don't know. I was fine. I was at FitCon, like I was having a great time. And then those started to happen more.
Yeah, I think that is, you know, one of the things that I've come to learn as I've gotten older is that I need to examine my behavior and my habits and just pay attention to them. As you mentioned, hair pulling is very commonly associated with PTSD, ADHD, anxiety, and OCD. And so its comorbidity rate is really high, which essentially means that most people who have trichotillomania also have ADHD, PTSD, one of the things, one of the Ds. And sorry, I'm one of the Ds. and so I think it does help to know that a lot of people do that and have it as an anxious, nervous response. And what you talked about earlier about your body having physiological responses to stress, we talk about it all the time, but that your body can have physiological responses to anxiousness, the way you feel. And they say that people who are in bad relationships, but particularly abusive relationships, get sick more than others. And part of the reason that they get sick is because they live in such a stressful environment and they suffer so much anxiety that their body is fighting back. And this often results in being sick often, not feeling good a lot, and even having autoimmune disorders. A lot of times these autoimmune disorders, doctors have a really hard time detecting them and figuring out what it is. Studies have shown that more and more people are getting these autoimmune disorders because of the anxiety that they have or the stress that they have that they're not dealing with in a healthy way, and they are ignoring or disassociating, and their body is having a physiological response to that. And they see it a lot in people who are in abusive relationships, where you go home and you're married to a narcissist and you don't realize the toll that it's taking on your body.
Right. And when you're stuck in either fight, flight, fawn, or freeze for too long, and that becomes your new normal, it's not healthy. And for me, that's exactly what happened. Was I just thought that this is how I was, and a lot of the symptoms I excused and dismissed, and just, you know, on the surface, people will look at me for sure and think that I had it all together, and I will assume responsibility as well when it comes into what you show people. I know the first thing, and still hear it to this day, even though it's been about a year, is, "You guys look so happy. We'd see everything on Facebook and Instagram, and you guys had the little Japanese boy for a year and all this stuff." And it was like, Right, because that's information I knew how to share, that I felt comfortable sharing. What am I going to go on Facebook and talk about all of the stuff that the state of Utah has now legally barred me from sharing? But yeah, like what are you gonna do? That, and so that's probably the final thing that I'll mention, because I feel like this could stimulate a whole other conversation, is that what you see on socials is not real life.
Yeah.
And
Gosh, social media gives me anxiety.
Oh yeah. Well, I got really good at perfecting my algorithm, and so now all I get is like really sweet animal videos and home hacks.
I like the cleaning stuff and how to organize things. Like I want to watch the video where they organize their fridge. I watch it like 100 times. That's my jam. I do have labels in the fridge. So yeah, but the rest of my family thinks I've taken it too far. I find it to be very convenient that you know where the items go. So if you open my fridge, you'll see that there are some printed labels to indicate where you should be putting things in the refrigerator.
I like it. You're talking to a girl that owns not one, but two. Label makers and a laminator. Listen, I smuggled all of those out so I talked about my job, but I worked for a company, went bankrupt, and they laid us all off over a Zoom call, and it was tragic, but everybody, shout out to all the Medlights, was very upset. And so when I tell you, people just started taking shit, like they started and they were like, oh, our company has gone bankrupt and we lose health benefits at midnight tonight because we're too poor to pay for them. Like, well, I'm taking the printer. And so I shit you not, my first thing was, I was like, where are all the label makers? And I took that and the clock.
I appreciate you being willing to share today and talk a little bit about your mental health journey and realizing, I think, in our middle ages that there's work to be done. It can be overwhelming, always, yeah. And I think I spent a lot of my 20s ignoring it. And again, I think it felt really acceptable for, to be a little bit wild when you're 26 or 27. And it just doesn't have the same appeal as you turn 35, 38, 40, right? And part of that journey for me has also been learning to take care of myself as much as I take care of others, and care about myself as much as I care about others being happy. I need to care about myself being happy. And so what would really help me to be happy would be if everybody listened to this podcast and shared it on social media with all their friends.
And labeled it.
Labeled it. So at the end of the episode, we like to play a little game called the Then or Now Throwdown, where we sort of choose, would you pick the then or would you pick the now? So my question for you is, the then back in the day was travel, take small adventures, be on a budget. The now is save for retirement, take big long trips, go to Sweden, get on a cruise when you're 60 with other 60-year-old ladies. What do you pick?
I think that I would stick to being a baller on a budget, and still the tiny trips that I took, I was really lucky with roller derby, honestly, because that afforded me the chance to go to all of these different towns with my girl gang and have these experiences with people who had the same ambitions and personalities that I did. I would still pick that, because it helped kind of set the precedence of my goals now today.
I'm bougie.
She's all, give me the 60-year-old biddies. That, like, I live for those memories, because they're the most fond experiences that I think I have. Knowing that my childhood was less than awesome, I got to kind of finally create some happy memories that have carried over into where I am now. And so on those especially hard days, it is so nice to look back and be like, when the team went to St. Louis and Josie and I won a twerking competition, I love that shit. I love that memory. That gives me a good dopamine bit. But now working for a fintech company with a bunch of old dudes that talk to me about how important financial investments are, I don't know, give me another 30 days and my answer may change. But for now, I live for twerking in front of the St. Louis Arch.
I get that. I, on another episode, talked about retirement planning. I am very much of the mindset of, again, the happy medium. How can I live my best life now while still knowing that at some point later I can still have a best life? And I just might need to temper all of that down a bit to do both. I don't want to not live my life now so I can have a best life when I'm 60. Right. But I also don't want to live my best life now and then be like, I mean, nothing is scarier than being poor or homeless at an older age.
Yeah, well, and not to get too cerebral, but there's no guarantee that we'll make it to 60.
Absolutely. I don't want to be that person who saves forever and never makes it on the trip because I died.
Oh, God.
It's dark. And we're out. Okay, so ramen noodles at Taco Bell, old school, eating all the crappy things that you want and enjoy and that we all love occasionally, but being able to have them more regularly when your metabolism is high in your 20s. Or do you enjoy the grocery shopping and creating, ideally more healthy, well-balanced meals now? If you could go back, would you take the Taco Bell and the ramen noodles without any concerns for your body?
Yeah, I'm still a little trash person. I think I know because people look at me and then they're like, "Oh, yeah, I bet she lives on broccoli." There it is. I knew I'd bring back broccoli. No, but I think because a form of control that I had experienced is diet culture. Within the last year, I have really embraced that moderation. Like, I do love cooking, don't get me wrong. I like cooking for others, though, and I have not yet found that balance of treating it as a love language for myself. And so I try to get a vegetable occasionally, for sure. I need to, but I'm in very much right now in that part of my journey where taking back my diet and doing what I can. So I'm not on a first name basis with the people at Beto's, but they definitely recognize my car.
Okay, that's fair. Well, ending this podcast on a happy note, instead of me talking about how I'm going to die before I take that trip, is me talking about how you and I are going to leave here and go get some chalupas and call it a day. Because I love a chalupa.
I'm down.
I know it's not real Mexican food. I don't care what it is. A chalupa Taco Bell, that's it for me.
Yeah, let's Baja Blast off.
Let's do it.
Oh, God. Okay.
That's my new song. Okay. Thank you, JeNae. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here. I know that I learned a lot from you, and I'm sure that our listeners did as well. But it's nice just to share and be really open about mental health in our middle ages.
Of course. Anytime.
This is Hot Flashbacks. We're out.
Thanks for listening to Hot Flashbacks. If you enjoyed it, be sure to follow us on social media and like this episode. Want more content? Smash that follow button wherever you get your podcasts and never miss an episode. Thanks for sharing your ears, friends. I'll catch you on the flip side.